showed it. Mr. Chairman, are you ready to begin?
Yes.
Please provide a 5-second countdown.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good morning. I call this meeting to order. A quorum is present. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Pursuant to Committee Rule 4 and House Rule 11, Clause 2, H4, the chair announces that he may postpone further proceedings today on the question of approving any measure or matter or adopting an amendment on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered. Before we proceed, I would like to go over some items for our members participating remotely. First, if you are experiencing connectivity issues, please make sure you or your staff contact our designated technical support so those issues can be resolved immediately. Members participating remotely must continue to use the video function for the duration of their participation in the hearing unless they experience connectivity issues or other technical problems that render the member unable to fully participate on camera. In the event of a recorded vote, members are encouraged to state their name first, then proceed to render his or her vote. By doing so, this will give the cameras a chance to locate who is speaking. It is committee policy that members participating remotely will remain muted when not recognized, just like turning your microphone on and off during an in-person hearing. This is out of courtesy to all members on the committee and so that background noise does not interfere with another member who is recognized to speak. When you are recognized, you will need to unmute your microphone and pause for 2 to 3 seconds before speaking so that your words are captured in the hearing room and on the live stream. Now, if you wish to have a document inserted into the record, please ask for unanimous consent and have your staff email the document to veteransaffairs.markup@mail.house.gov. It will be uploaded to the committee document repository. Without objection, members will be recognized in order of seniority during this markup today. This will make it easier for me to ensure all members participating have an opportunity to be recognized. Does any member have a question about the conduct of this hearing with members participating remotely? Hearing none, we'll now move on. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Welcome, everyone. Dr. Rowe, since this will likely be our last markup together, I want to take a moment to thank you for your friendship and your leadership over the years. You have been a great advocate for veterans, and I'm going to miss having you in the room as the committee carries on the work that you've done over the past 12 years. One of the issues you have recently brought to our attention is the need to look at veteran health care eligibility. We spent a few minutes discussing it last week during our legislative hearing, and I want you to be part of a larger conversation on this topic. And I would like to host an oversight hearing on health care eligibility before you retire. I will have our staff work out a time during November or December to hold the first hearing on eligibility in what has likely been more than 20 years. While this is one of the smaller markups we've held, I think the bills before us are significant. Most members of this committee have championed policies that would work to reduce veteran suicide. It hasn't always been easy, but we have found a way to include a good portion of those policy ideas in H.R. 8247, the Veterans Compact Act. To those members whose ideas were not included, I can promise this isn't going to be the last conversation or the only legislation we consider regarding veteran suicide prevention. We will pick up where we left off on lethal means training and the zero suicide demonstration. We still can do more to ensure women veterans and veterans of color have an easier pathway to VA benefits and health care. I don't mention these provisions to diminish the work that has been accomplished, but to remind us all that we can and will continue to focus on reducing veteran suicide. I want to recognize the work of Senators Moran and Tester. Not only did they work together to pass a fully bipartisan bicameral bill, S-785, the Commander John Scott Hannon Veterans Mental Health Care Improvement Act, which we will pass when we are on the floor next week, but they also found a way to help me craft a suicide prevention bill that will pass unanimously out of the House. And I know they will work just as hard to pass the Veterans Compact Act, so thank you for your leadership and the dedication to improving the lives of veterans. The Senate has also passed 6 additional House bills that will be signed into law, and they continue to work to develop legislation. And when it is voted through the Senate, I will work to get it passed through the House as well. I also want to thank our staff, both on the majority and the minority. John Towers, thank you and your staff for working with us to get the Veterans Compact Act to a place where we can advance it through the House and hand it off to the Senate. I also want to thank Carolyn Canfield, the staff director for Senator Moran, and Tony McLean, Senator Tester's staff director, and both of their staffs for the countless hours they spent away from their families over the past couple of weeks to get the Compact Act to a good place. And of course, I'm very grateful to my own staff director, Ray Kelly, and all of the amazing staff that work under him. And I'll say that for both majority and minority staff of the Veterans Affairs Committee, we have superb people. Can't compliment them enough in the bipartisan spirit that we operate under here. Without their dedication and service on behalf of the nation's veterans, we wouldn't have the bill before us this morning. With that, I now recognize Dr. Rowe for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your kind words. It indeed has been a privilege these last dozen years to serve on this committee with this bipartisan committee, and we've done a lot of good work for our nation's heroes, without a doubt. I look from 1 million claims, disability claims, to now under 40,000, and soon hopefully to be down to 0. I want to thank you for your work. And I'm pleased to be here this morning to advance legislation to improve transparency throughout the Department of Veterans Affairs, strengthen the oversight provided by the VA Inspector General, and extend employment protections to National Guard members on state active duty orders, and of course, to help prevent veteran suicide. As members are well aware, Chairman Takano and I have been working over the last several weeks with Senators Moran and Tester, the chairman and ranking member of the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs, to secure passage of Senate Bill 785, Commander John Scott Hannon Veterans Mental Health Care Improvement Act. Following last week's legislative hearing, our staff worked with Chairman Moran and Ranking Member Tester's staff throughout the weekend to come to an agreement on a number of House provisions that could move through Congress this year in exchange for House passage of Senate 785. Those provisions are contained in Chairman Takano's Veterans Compact Act, one of the bills on today's agenda. I'm proud of the work that, together with our friends and colleagues in the Senate, we were able to produce, and I'm grateful to Chairman Moran and Ranking Member Tester for their commitment to finding a way forward on behalf of the veterans we serve. I will also be supporting the Veterans Compact Act today and appreciate the Chairman for introducing it. That said, the House consideration of a bipartisan bill to increase care for veterans at risk for suicide that gained the support of every U.S. Senator and a wide variety of stakeholders, including every major veteran service organization, veterans serving direct care organizations across the country, and the VA should never have been in question. Certainly not when we're losing 20 service members and veterans a day to suicide and are working steadfastly to find solutions to help save their lives. I look forward to House considerations of both S-785 and the Compact Act next week and hope that we can continue working together on bipartisan, bicameral basis in the admittedly limited time left in the 116th Congress and deliver even more for our nation's veterans. Doing so will require good faith efforts on both sides. Unfortunately, we've had a problem in this Congress on a number of critical issues, one of the issues that is the sacred nature of memorials and monuments and grave sites dedicated to our fallen heroes. During our last full committee markup on July 30th, I offered an amendment to ensure the continued dignity of those hallowed sites. My amendment would have required those knowingly damaged grave sites or memorials located on VA property or in VA-funded state or tribal veteran cemeteries to pay a fine or serve time in jail or both. My amendment was endorsed by the American Legion, whose support and unwavering commitment to our brothers and sisters in arms, both past and present, I greatly appreciate. Members may recall that I agreed to withdraw my amendment during our July markup because Chairman Takano gave me his word on the record that he would work to find a bipartisan path forward in September. Based on that promise, it was my understanding that we would work together during the August recess to reach a compromise that would address the chairman's jurisdictional and other concerns in order to consider and pass my amendment today. I revised my amendment to limit the penalty it would impose only to those gravestones and memorials that are on VA property or in federally funded state and tribal cemeteries in order to avoid invoking jurisdiction of the Natural Resources Committee. I also modified it to cross-reference Title 18 rather than Title 38 to again address the chairman's concerns. These changes were provided to the majority staff. I was shocked to learn that despite the chairman's commitment to work with me on these protections, questions are still being raised about the need for them at all. Let me briefly remind us why exactly my amendment is necessary. This summer, the World War II Memorial, the VA headquarters building, and other sites dedicated to honoring and memorializing veterans were vandalized. It is unacceptable for criminals to use peaceful protests as cover for property damage, and it's especially so when that property is dedicated to the millions of men and women throughout this country's history that secured our right to protest and every other right we enjoy under the Constitution in the first place. As a veteran, I'm personally grieved by the destruction of these sacred sites because I see it as an affront to the memory of those who were lost in service to our country, including my friends and fellow soldiers. Last markup, I asked you to all remember the names of 4 brave men I knew who were tragically killed in Vietnam. Johnny Parham, Eagle Scout, ran the 3rd leg on the 2-mile relay team with me in high school. Bob Perry, I went to Bob from the 1st grade till we graduated from high school and our ways departed. First Sergeant Thomas E. Thayer, father of 4, killed in action, 1965, Silver Star winner. And Major Homer Pease, who entered the Army at the ripe old age of 13 in 1943 to fight for his country in the 101st Airborne Division. My amendment is needed to protect the legacy of those 4 men and the final resting place of countless other fallen heroes whose stories I could not begin to do justice to this morning. Who will speak for them if we do not? Condemning these criminal acts should be common sense for members of both sides of the aisle, and certainly for those of us serving on the Veterans Affairs Committee. And I do share some frustration, Mr. Chairman, because of this. My efforts to work with the committee to address your concerns on this issue have been met, but have been met, unfortunately, with inaction. I believe that the revised amendment I submitted for consideration addresses those concerns that were voiced in July. However, it was rejected, and no alternative language was proposed to fulfill the commitment to me, and more importantly, to ensure that these veterans' memorials remain free of desecration and disrespect. Multiple times in this Congress, Mr. Chairman, we've vowed to work with each other and the minority on matters of importance to veterans. Congressman Roy will speak in a moment about his bill to protect veterans' Second Amendment rights. Before he does, I'd like to remind the committee that the American Legion joint hearing in February of 2019, the chairman quoted, "My side of the aisle are committed to protecting the Second Amendment rights of our nation's veterans." Despite that statement, which was made more than a year and a half ago, our committee has not included any Second Amendment legislation on a markup calendar in this Congress. A similar story could be told about Congressman Barr's bill to safeguard veteran children in VA health care programs from sex offenders and other violent predators. This is another common sense issue for this committee and the entire Congress. It defies understanding why we haven't acted on these after all this time. We should rightly acknowledge our achievement today to achieve a bipartisan, bicameral agreement to help prevent veteran suicide, and I do, and I thank the chairman for his leadership on that. That has been our stated priority in this Congress, and I'm grateful that we will pass comprehensive legislation to address it out of the House next week after almost 2 years of work. But our work is far from over, and I hope that by the time history is written on the 116th Congress, we'll have many more achievements to note on behalf of all those served. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Without objection, opening statements of any other members will be included in the record. The committee will now proceed to consideration of H.R. 8247. The clerk will please designate the bill.
H.R. 8247, to make certain improvements relating to the transition of
Text was
individuals.
circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with, and without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I now recognize myself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute. The clerk will designate the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 8247.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read and considered as original text for amendment. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes, and I urge my colleagues to support 8247, the Veterans Comprehensive Prevention, Access to Care, and Treatment Act of 2020. I am pleased to offer this bill containing 9 provisions related to veterans' mental health, well-being, and suicide prevention. Thanks to members on and off this committee for their dedication to this issue and this legislation. The Veterans Compact Act includes my provision to ensure that veterans in acute suicidal crisis will receive stabilization care and never see a bill for it. Also included are provisions to allow family members to access suicide prevention education programs to better support their veteran. A compact also offers 2 provisions designed to better understand the particular needs of women veterans by directing VA to report on women veterans' health care usage and the specific program needs of women veterans experiencing homelessness and housing insecurity. The bill also mandates that VA report back to Congress on the details of Solid Start, a relatively new VA approach to contacting and supporting veterans who have recently separated from the military. This is a known high-risk period for suicide among veterans. Compact will ensure that veterans also get a reminder to come back in for VA services within certain time periods so they don't inadvertently lose eligibility for some of those VA services. This bill requires new annual trainings to make sure that all VA police officers are familiar with mental health challenges and competent in crisis de-escalation techniques. Finally, the compact sets up an interagency task force to look at increasing veterans' access to the outdoors, and in particular, the use of our public lands for healing and recreation. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Dr. Rowe, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I said in my opening statement, H.R. 8247, the Veterans Compact Act, contains provisions that were agreed upon by all 4 corners. In other words, both the majority and the minority in both House and Senate. The amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 8247 reflects technical corrections to the bill that were identified after it was introduced. These corrections were also agreed to by all 4 corners. This bill, which is sponsored by Chairman Takano, would increase support for veterans as they transition out of the military by creating a pilot program to share information with their friends and family about the challenges and stresses of transition and the benefits and services available to those who have served, and by requiring a report on the Solid Start program, as was mentioned. It would encourage veterans to engage with VA by requiring VA to conduct outreach to those veterans who have not been seen by the VA in the preceding 2 years. It would improve care for the growing number of women veterans by requiring an annual report on their use of the VA healthcare system and a gap analysis of the programs that serve those who are homeless or precariously housed to identify areas in need of enhancement. Most importantly, it would help prevent veteran suicide by requiring suicide prevention training for VA police officers, expanding training and support for family members and caregivers of veterans with mental health disorders, and requiring VA to cover the cost of emergent suicide care for veterans, including those with other than honorable discharges who are in an acute suicidal crisis. Veterans Compact Act also includes the text of a bill offered by Congressman Chris Smith, the former chairman of this committee. Because there is no one-size-fits-all approach to mental health and well-being, we must explore alternative, non-pharmacological methods to improve veteran quality of life and encourage hope and healing among those who are hurting. There is arguably no better place to do that than in the great outdoors. Our country is blessed with a plethora of national parks and other public lands. Congressman Smith's bill would create a task force to examine how those and other outdoor spaces could be used to facilitate health and wellness among veterans. I'm grateful to Congressman Smith's bill being included here, and I thank him for his hard work and leadership on this issue and his long-time dedication to those who have served. As I said in my opening statement, I am in full support of the Veterans Compact Act, and I look forward to House consideration of it and Senate 785 next week to fulfill this committee's commitment to doing our part to support veterans who are struggling with suicide. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe. Thank you, Ranking Member Dr. Rowe. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? If not, the question is on the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 8247. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. I now recognize Ranking Member Rowe for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that H.R. 8247 as amended be reported favorably to the House of Representatives.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Without objection, the staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes in the committee amendments.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file minority or supplemental additional or dissenting views on H.R. 8247.
Without objection, so ordered. And we now move on to the next item. Pursuant to agreement with the ranking member, we will now consider a number of bills en bloc. It is my understanding that there are no amendments to these measures, except in some cases amendments in the nature of a substitute previously noticed pursuant to the committee's rules. Accordingly, I ask unanimous consent to call up H.R. 7163, H.R. 5843, H.R. 7785, H.R. 6092 en bloc. The clerk shall report.
H.R. 7163, the VA FOIA.
Text of the en bloc bills were circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. I ask that the bills be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. I further ask unanimous consent that the previously noticed amendments in the nature of substitute to H.R. 7163, H.R. 5843, H.R. 7785 be called up en bloc and be considered as read. Without objection, so ordered. I would like to take a moment to highlight these important pieces of legislation. The amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 7163, the VA FOIA Reform Act of 2020, introduced by Mr. Cisneros, requires the Secretary to establish and carry out a plan to better meet the requirements of the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, regarding timeliness of its response to requests for information. Since its introduction, the minority and majority staff worked together to perfect the language resulting in today's ANS. The legislation has the support of the American Legion, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, and the Paralyzed Veterans of America. I urge my colleagues to support the legislation. The amendment in nature of a substitute to H.R. 5843, the Strengthening Oversight for Veterans Act of 2020, introduced by Ms. Rice, will provide the VA Inspector General with testimonial subpoena authority, which would allow stronger oversight of VA. I also urge my colleagues to support the legislation. I'd also like to thank Mr. Rose for his work on H.R. 7785 and for his continued service to his community in the National Guard. He has seen the increased use of National Guard this year. He's actually seen the increased use of National Guard this year firsthand. And I appreciate Mr. Rose identifying a shortcoming in the protections we have for our service members and for bringing it to the committee's attention. Now, service members should not have to worry if their employer could fire them for reporting to duty to serve their community. Haggling between state and federal government over who is funding emergency or disaster responses should not impact a service member's protections. I want to thank Dr. Rowe and minority staff for working with us on this bill, and I look forward to working with our Senate counterparts to get it over the finish line this year. I urge my colleagues to support the legislation. I want to thank Dr. Dunn for introducing H.R. 6092, the Veterans Prostate Cancer Treatment and Research Act. Prostate cancer is the #1 cancer diagnosed in the Veterans Health Administration. Research has shown that exposure to herbicides, including Agent Orange, increases the risk of prostate cancer. This bill will establish a national clinical pathway for research and treatment of all stages of prostate cancer, from early detection to the end of life within VA's National Surgery Office, and enable coordination and collaboration with other relevant federal agencies. This bill will also establish a national center of the Prostate Clinical Care Implementation Program. H.R. 6092 will save and extend lives by improving research and clinical care for treatment of prostate cancer. Again, I urge my colleagues to support the legislation. I support all 4 bills in this en bloc package and urge each one of you to support them too. I now recognize Ranking Member Dr. Rowe for 5 minutes to speak on the en bloc package.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While I will be supporting all of the en bloc bills this morning, I want to say particularly thanks to Dr. Dunn for his work on H.R. 6092, the Veterans Prostate Cancer Treatment and Research Act. Approximately 1 in 5 male veterans are expected to be diagnosed with prostate cancer in their lifetime. A few years ago, as chairman of this committee, I was one of them. As a prostate cancer survivor, I know firsthand the life-saving importance of early detection and intervention. Veterans are diagnosed with prostate cancer at twice the rate of the general population, making it the most commonly diagnosed cancer among veterans in the VA healthcare system. Dr. Dunn's bill would help ensure that every one of those veterans benefit from the best practices in prostate cancer detection, treatment, and research so that they can have the best possible chance for a full recovery. I'm also proud to support this bill today, and I once again thank Dr. Dunn, who is my friend, fellow veteran, fellow physician, and the ranking member on our subcommittee on health for introducing it, and for his hard work and steadfast dedication to improving care for all of our nation's veterans, including those with prostate cancer. I also want to thank Congresswoman Rice and Congresswoman Radewagen for their work on H.R. 5843, which would give the VA Inspector General testimonial subpoena authority enforceable by the U.S. District Courts, as well as Congressman Cisneros for his work on H.R. 7163 to improve the timeliness of VA's response to Freedom of Information Act requests. The amendments in the nature of a substitute to those bills reflect the minority's input, and I'm grateful for those members' willingness to work with us on these bills. The legislative process benefits from the collaboration, and so do our nation's veterans. I also appreciate Congressman Rose's efforts on H.R. 7785, which would extend USERRA rights to members of the National Guard who are serving on state active duty orders. And just, Congressman Rose, when I was the mayor, or when I was on the city commission, just as I got elected, my first political elected office in 2003, a lot of our Guard and service members were being called up for Desert Shield, Desert Storm, as you recall, when we went into Iraq. And a lot of those were not veterans, and they didn't understand. One was a police sergeant, I remembered, and he had a family, and his salary as a police sergeant was more than his paycheck was as a, when he was called up, whatever his MOS was. I suggested that our city make up the difference in that paycheck so that he wasn't harmed financially. So the city of Johnson City, Tennessee, when one of our guardsmen or reservists are called up, they are made whole. And I thank you for your pointing this out. It should have been done. This was just, and I really appreciate what you did now. And so thank you for that. The men and women of the National Guard have stepped up to serve their communities across the country this year in response to COVID-19, and I know that Congressman Rose was one of them. Ensuring that their civilian jobs are protected while they are on state orders are one way to show our appreciation for their brave and selfless service, and for that reason, I'm very pleased to support this bill today. And in closing, I want to say about a friend of mine, Ernie Rumsby, who died yesterday. Ernie was a Navy veteran. One of the most dedicated veterans that I know. He set up the Tri-Cities Military Affairs Council. When he first came to me that idea, I didn't think it was going to be anything. But he got between 300 and 400 businesses together to donate money, goods, and services to veterans in need. And he could reach out almost immediately. And so I want our prayers to go to Ernie and his family. He's a great American, and I am very sorry for his passing. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Rowe. Does any other member have wish to speak or wish to be recognized to discuss the en bloc agenda items? Mr. Rose, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Rowe, thank you for your kind words as well and for your extraordinary service to this nation. And thank you, of course, for including this important bill at today's markup. Thank you to my colleague, Representative Stube, for co-leading this legislation with me. As described, my bill would update the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act, a set of key employment discrimination protections for our service members to include National Guardsmen when they're called up on state active duty orders, otherwise known as SAD. So when they come home after serving, they don't lose their jobs. These folks have enough stress to deal with. Our National Guardsmen and women served as lifelines to our communities in the midst of the widespread COVID pandemic. They have assembled test kits, they've distributed meals, they've supplied medical personnel to hospital systems in need. I saw this service firsthand during the COVID pandemic. It did not matter what task was put in front of them, they got the job done. So many of them having to spend months away from their family in the process. I even worked to get a National Guard mobile testing unit to the Brooklyn VA in my district to help supplemental testing capacity for our VA staff. Another task that the National Guard's not in their normal orbit, but they said this has got to be done, and they did it. The very last thing we should be doing while our National Guardsmen and Guardswomen are supporting us is to allow them to be denied employment when they return to their civilian jobs. When I was activated in my district on Staten Island, I didn't have to worry about losing my job, no matter how hard my colleagues across the aisle might try. I had the luxury of coming back to the house with zero issue. It's a sad fact right now, based off varying state laws that can determine if that's the case for a fellow Guardsman and Guardswoman. This is an outrage. That's why we introduced this bill, which will extend employment protections against discrimination for those serving on SAD orders. It should not matter if they're activated based off federal government orders, state active duty orders. It should not matter where the pot of money is being drawn from. It should just matter that they are willing to serve. So I thank you all again for your support for this measure, and I urge the adoption of this amendment and the swift passage of this bipartisan bill. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Rowe and Congressman Rose, for your service, and thank you for looking out for the National Guardsmen. Thank you. I now call on Ms. Radewagen for 5 minutes. Ms. Radewagen.
I want to give a very special thank you to Representative Rice for her leadership on H.R. 5843, the Strengthening Oversight for Veterans Act. I also want to thank you, the Chairman and Ranking Member, for taking up this legislation, as well as my colleagues for their bipartisan work to ensure this bill can pass out of this committee by UC. Finally, peeking behind the curtain for a bit, I want to thank the committee staff for their work. They've been especially helpful coordinating things with my office as we've learned to do our work remotely during the pandemic. Regardless of any challenges we may face, the principle is always how to best serve those who served our country. Ultimately, this bill helps the VA do just that. The Inspector General conducts necessary investigations that ensure services are carried out as designed, or that resources go where Congress intended. That's good for veterans. I yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Radewagen. Mr. Roy, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Roy?
I thank the Chairman. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. I appreciate it. I won't take up too much time. I just wanted to take a moment to say I appreciate that we had on our legislative hearing, I think it was last week, a conversation about the important legislation that I introduced, H.R. 3450, along with what Ranking Member Rowe had introduced, H.R. 3826, and how important those are for the veterans that I represent in Texas 21 and that we all represent. And I think at this time when we're all continuing to have the stories and the conversations about suicide, mental health, the toll that extended conflict has taken on our men and women in uniform and those who have come home and that have concerns, I think rightful concerns about whether or not they're going to be able to have their Second Amendment rights protected, and concerns about going to the VA, and that by simply going to the VA or having a decision or determination made, or in the case of taking benefits, could somehow end up on a NICS list. And I think that is a real concern. I hear it from dozens of veterans whenever I go home. I've heard from hundreds in the district. And it's not something that I frankly try to stoke. I try to explain and walk through the state of the current law. But part of explaining the state of the current law is when you have legislation that was voted on and passed out of the House, even if it hasn't become law, that would elevate the concern and that would cause that which we're trying to avoid. I wish we were having a vote on it. I think we should. I'm not afraid to vote. I'm happy to vote on a lot of different things, whatever that's going to, whatever consequences that may bring when our constituents look at our votes. I just think we ought to have a vote on it. It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple. And I think we ought to just go ahead and have a debate and vote on it. It's an important matter for our veterans. And then the second thing I wanted to raise is H.R. 6082, the Forgotten Vietnam Veterans Act that I co-sponsored with T.J. Cox. Again, I think it's an important fix. It's somewhere in the zip code of a technical correction to simply recognize so many of our Vietnam veterans who were a part of the conflict in the time that DOD recognizes it, but that the VA does not. And I just think we ought to fix that, match those. It's not going to be an enormous number. We're obviously starting to lose more Vietnam veterans. It's becoming now for us, it's a little bit more like World War II generation now as we're starting to move up and age. And so I just wish we would go ahead and solve that problem. Again, it's a bipartisan bill and something that I think we ought to bring up. And I appreciate the chairman giving me the minutes here to talk. I won't go on any further so we can go and finish and vote and wrap up. But thanks for the time. I do think those issues merit consideration before waiting till January. I think we ought to go ahead and do our job and work on those things. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Congressman Roy. Is there further discussion on the en bloc agenda items? Any further discussion on the en bloc agenda items? Hearing no further discussion, the question is on agreeing to the amendments in the nature of a substitute en bloc. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Right.
All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendments in the nature of a substitute en bloc are agreed to. I now recognize Ranking Member Rowe for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that H.R. 7163 as amended, H.R. 5843 as amended, H.R. 7785 as amended, H.R. 6092 be favorably reported to the House of Representatives.
The question now is on reporting H.R. 7163, H.R. as amended, H.R. 5843 as amended, H.R. 7785 as amended, and H.R. 6092 be reported favorably to the House of Representatives. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion to report the measures en bloc is agreed to. Without objection, the staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes. The meeting is now adjourned.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file minority supplemental, additional, or dissenting views on these bills, and I yield back.
Without objection, so ordered. This meeting is now adjourned.
That was pretty quick.